Righty-ho. Good afternoon, team. It's a real pleasure to be up here hosting this panel this afternoon. I was lucky enough to be on the steering committee that pulled together today under Satish's leadership. And when we talked about this panel, we really talked about the doing. You know, we've heard a lot today about theory and about science and about policy, but the four colleagues that I have up on the stage here today are doing this now. You know, we're getting real financial returns, we're getting actual results, and this isn't something that is forecast to happen. What we're going to talk to you about is happening every day in their businesses, and it's something I think we should be all really, really proud of. I think also picking up on the theme, and Simon sort of stole my introduction earlier, but the theme from the youth movement, that, you know, there is the science, there is the math, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. You know, we know we need to do this, so let's do it. My panellists today that will be discussing this topic with us over the next half an hour as we lead into lunch. Simon Wilson, as you met earlier before, he did offer to give me another hug to kick this off, so maybe, no, stay there. But Simon's obviously a leader in this space, and he's going to really, I think, pull the glue together from some of our other panellists who have the government and the development side of things. Davina Rooney. Davina is the Sustainability GM for Stocklands. I've had the pleasure of knowing Davina for a long time, since my Lend-Lease days, and you know, she walks the walk. You know, we talk about doing things. She spent 8 months in the Himalayas building a school for a community over there. She's won multiple awards in her career, and later on we will talk to her about her upcoming transition to be the new CEO of the Green Building Council Australia. We also have Paul Wilkinson. Paul's with Mansons. I really admire what Ted and Callum and the team have done at Mansons. They currently have over 185,000 square metres of net lettable area that is green rated. That's incredible. I think it's about 20% of the stock in Auckland. It's about 40% of the new build green rated stock. So it's phenomenal, the leadership they've shown, and I look forward to hearing from Paul talk more about the position they took before the green rating tools even existed here in the country. And finally is Jenny. Jenny Lackey's the Group GM for Strategy for ECHA. We've heard a little bit today from Minister Shaw about, I guess, the government position, but I mean, ECHA have been revitalising their strategy and looking to mobilise Kiwis and how we can live this every day. We talked about energy ratings on cars and appliances, refrigerators, but not in buildings yet. But more than just that, I think ECHA are taking quite a leadership space across other asset classes. So while the Green Star tools are primarily addressing our office and our residential needs, I think ECHA have also got some exciting initiatives and spaces that also use up a bit of carbon, our hospitals, our schools, our other government buildings. So without further ado, Jenny, can I ask you to kick things off with a brief introduction to what's happening with the ECHA strategy?
Great, thank you. I'm mortified it's the energy nerd from Wellington that has the slide deck. I apologise. For those of you that don't know, ECHA is the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, and if you know us at all, unless you've worked with us on a NABERS New Zealand rating, it will be as energy-wise in the home insulation program that we've done. We've been very active in the home insulation space, insulating over 350,000 homes in the last 9 years. But that's not all we do, and I want to talk to you today about what more we can do, particularly as we move into a low emissions economy. Minister Shaw spoke earlier today, and I'm intimately involved in it, about a complex policy environment in Wellington. You've got the Interim Climate Commission coming forward with recommendations on 100% renewable electricity targets. You've got Minister Shaw trying to land his climate change bill. It wobbles from being zero carbon to not being zero carbon, to be honest, so, you know, watch this space. And you've got the response to the Productivity Commission report, which was 500 or so pages of fascinating material for those of you that are interested. But I guess my message today is we cannot wait for policy certainty. And, you know, as a public servant, I shouldn't say that, but I will. The ministers are aiming for providing our economy with a pathway forward, but we can't wait for it. And that's been a message I've heard a number of times today. We need to sort of crack on and do, and that is where EECA as a delivery agency is focused. You will see in our refreshed strategic focus areas a real emphasis on carbon and emissions. So a real focus on low carbon productive business, which involves not just Neighbours NZ, but technology demonstrations, particularly in the area of process heat, and I'll talk to that in a second. We have a pretty large electric vehicles program, a contestable fund, and so for those of you who are developers, be thinking about the transport needs of your future tenants, including EV charging, but I won't talk too much about that today. Energy efficient homes, Antonia from ANZ very correctly said that nobody likes the words energy efficiency, they like the words warm and dry, but this change in our strategic focus area signals that we do need to look at other things in homes barring insulation, and that includes, I think, lighting, space heating and other systems, including emerging technology around sensors and home management systems. Government leadership is one I'll talk to particularly today. We are asking this economy to move to low carbon, but as correctly identified, the government hasn't been strong in improving its own portfolio. But there are opportunities, and I'd like us to all think about how we can capitalise on them. And then engaging hearts and minds. I can't talk too much about this, but suffice it to say, the conversation about energy efficiency and sustainability and dire warnings for the future aren't resonating with New Zealanders. So EECA is working hard to think about what that future looks like when we talk to New Zealand about this. But anyway, cracking into the detail, EECA is a small agency and we have very limited funding. So our impetus is to focus on impact. And for us, the carbon emissions in the energy space are in businesses, particularly process heat and transport. And to that end, we really need to think about the hard wins, not the easy wins. We are going to leave it up to you guys with our utmost support for the easy wins like lighting and LEDs and that market transformation that is happening at pace. The hard stuff is fossil fuels in buildings, and we talked about that. I commend the NZGBC and Enviromark for setting a rating that says no more fossils. It's hard though, and things get in the way. The good news is we can do something, and this is just a graph that shows the comparative emissions from the state sector, and you look at that big chunk of heating in the DHBs compared to that little chunk of energy in the ministries on the right-hand side. So we are really focused on the big impact things, and that looks to us like hospitals, tertiary institutions, and schools. So here's something that happened. This is a little bit old, but we're excited about it. Northland DHB swapped out diesel boilers for high temperature heat pumps in 2 of its hospitals. It's got less than a 5-year payback. Dargaville is going to save $100,000 a year on energy costs. This was with the government support through a scheme called Crown Loans, but it shows in very quick, this is a rapid fire stop through this project, it shows that projects are there, they are cost effective now, they're possible, and they have multiple benefits. So I'm excited to go into this future with you all. Thank you.
Cheers, Jenny. Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to working more with Craig too, and how we get more of those projects up and running.
Yeah, Craig's got the money.
Craig's got the money. You told me to track him down over lunch. Hey, Mansons, as I mentioned before, have a huge history with green building. They currently have 3 buildings under construction that are all targeting 6-star. They are also building their own headquarters that's targeting 6-star. So again, walking the walk. Paul, could you give us a little bit of history as to why was it that Mansons as a company and in the leadership team, why were you so early in embracing this back in 2008 before there was even a tool in New Zealand to rate green buildings?
Thanks, Lord. The buildings that you've referred to that we got rated early on, they're 2 buildings down in Key Park. They're currently occupied by GE and BNZ. When we started those developments, the New Zealand Green Building Council didn't exist, so we adopted the Australian tool. A couple of months into that project, the New Zealand Green Building Council was established, and fortunately they were in agreement with what we had done to date, and They were happy that it was in line with their new tool, which was basically an adaptation of the Australian tool. So we subsequently had those projects certified by the NZGBC. Following those two projects, we made the commercial decision that we would certify all of our commercial buildings going forward, both for a design and a built rating. Our decision to proceed on this basis also filled what we believed was a gap in the market, and in turn this gave us a point of difference over other developers. The other key component in this decision was the manner in which the Green Star aligned with the Manson family's sort of sense of corporate responsibility. As you know, the clear majority of our developments are within Auckland City and the city fringe, and have been so for the last 40 years. So we're basically carrying out these developments within our own backyard, and are therefore very conscious that we need to deliver quality buildings that both the family and the business can be proud of. The ownership structure of Manson's being completely family owned is another element in this decision. There's currently a third generation of directors, and the reputation of both the family and the company is continuing, is a continuing driver for successful developments. Another reason we place such a strong emphasis on Green Star and continue to do so is the ever-changing Auckland commercial market. Over the last decade, we've seen the commercial market within Auckland mature somewhat in terms of the quality of the product that's being constructed within the city, and this has resulted in parallels now being drawn between Auckland and other world-class cities. For us, that's a massive positive. It goes a long way to attracting both local and international tenants and purchasers, as we've found that the number one criteria for a lot of our tenants is that they occupy a green building. And whether that's to align with their corporate sustainability practices or policies is one of the reasons. This is actually, for us, has now reached the point that obtaining particular Green Star ratings for our developments forms part of the development agreement with the tenants and is contained within sale and purchase agreements. From our perspective, it's common knowledge that green buildings are largely considered more desirable places to work, result in happier staff and improved outputs. These features have resulted in repeat business for us from multiple tenants over the last sort of decade. The challenge, however, with this approach is the greater expectation of the quality of the developments. For us, that's quite exciting. Each development we build basically becomes a show home for future tenants of the next development, as well as a benchmark for purchasers, particularly those purchasers who are purchasing the buildings before they're completed. Then there's those elements or features which for us 3 or 4 projects ago was considered innovative, and they're now basically just considered the norm. Solar panels, LED lighting for us a while ago, like I say, was innovative, and they now form part of the base build. And from our purchases, which often we deal with the same purchases time and time again, these are barely getting a second look, which is great, but it's amazing how quickly the market's changed. So regardless, in our view, the ever increasing expectations again are only a positive. I guess for us, the challenge is to continue to evolve as a business and as property developers, and try and basically work out if there's any innovation points left available.
Look, I'm sure you'll find some, and to talk about that doing, it's incredible that within the Manson's portfolio you've attracted Xero, Mercury, Southern Cross, some of the biggest names in New Zealand businesses are obviously attracted to those buildings. So it's clearly illustrated that the tenants want this as part of their brief. And we've got our colleagues in the room from Augusta today, which is an example of the capital that's buying these buildings. And not only do they believe in the model, but over the last 18 months, they've raised over $250 million from mums and dads across New Zealand who invest in their syndications based on these green ratings. So we are seeing it stack up with tenants, and we are seeing it stack up with capital. I think it's a huge credit to you for that. Can I lead that into you, Davina? I mean, you guys at Stocklands, and sorry, perhaps Australia in general, have been ahead of us in this game. You now have some incredible data. I mean, we're just starting to catch up on these actual real life savings. You build to a certain quality, you retain ownership, you retain the management, obligations. What are some of the results you've seen in the data coming through over the last decade?
Well, I think we're in the position, a number of the things that you're talking about, establishing the business case, we've seen the business case. So when we, reflect on Stockland's results at our, when we talk at our annual general meeting, we'll turn around and talk about our over $90 million worth of savings in deferred bills. We'll turn around and talk about the above benchmark returns that we've received through the energy efficiency projects. And I think it's really important that we get more comfortable in that language so that we can, I've turned around to some of my development colleagues and they've said, I don't have the money for the energy efficiency on that building, I'm really sorry. And I've said, just build one less shop. It's a retail development, build one less shop. And they're like, what do you mean? I have better returns than you. If you look at the most accretive value proposition to our fundamental business case, we've got to stop talking about 5-year paybacks and talk about 20% return hurdles, flip the metrics and talk about accretive value creation. When we actually flip that narrative and start comparing them against our business projects and really look at how we can drive this change faster, I think there's a real opportunity. And so if you don't think you'll get a long-term strategy buy-in from your business, what I'd suggest is start with a few pilots, then make them sensational, then take them to scale and build your strategy off the back of that. So there's really phenomenal opportunities. People now refer to the higher valuations we see in the Australian marketplace. When we were brass knuckle boxing some of these initiatives through 12 years ago, we didn't have those stats behind us. But what we could do on a project by project basis was make the case to demonstrate. And sometimes we'd do it at small scale, and we did that, and we actually built the database that's now referenced internationally. And how we did that was the kind of collaboration that you see today and that you have here, that you see with the Property Council, with the Green Building Council, with your opportunities with neighbours, pulling in the same direction and driving a broader industry conversation. And I think that's the key opportunity you have. And I really congratulate the New Zealand Green Building Council for pulling this collective of the willing so you can drive that direction.
Yeah, fantastic, Davina. And when we were talking about this last night, what I found really interesting as well is that you weren't waiting for budgeting cycles. It wasn't a case of, hey, let's sit down, let's wait for a financial year, let's see if we can get this into next year's budget. You were like, no, let's do this because it makes commercial and financial sense.
So one of the things that we negotiated after some successful pilots was that we didn't just consider the sustainability projects as cost drags that had to go through annual budget cycles. And if someone did it and then a facility manager changed, you lost all momentum before you got time to fix the dripping tap or fix this opportunity. Went on the front foot and said these are value accretive projects, and like other business value accretive projects, if we can demonstrate we exceed returns, we should do them tomorrow like any other value driving opportunity. And the changing of that narrative really put our best and our brightest on their front foot. And one of the other fabulous things that we saw in our portfolio is it's quite hard to measure quality across different facility managers and teams. There aren't many lead indicators. We would actually say their sustainability performance across a portfolio was a great lead indicator for quality. And so what we would find is the facility managers who are managing their energy efficiency the best were also managing their customer relationships the best, and they were also managing their contractors. Now, normally you'd only find out if you have a contract issue if someone slips, falls, and you have a lawsuit. What we started to find was looking at this metric was actually a lead indicator for other parts of our quality across our portfolio. In the same way they talk about corporate performance, if you have a high ESG rating, it's usually a litmus for quality across your broader portfolio.
Yeah, fantastic. Simon, you've got a unique position that you've been leading in this space for a long time with the NZGBC as well as GBCA. As your role with RDT, you're obviously advising a huge number of clients, and as you mentioned before, that scale and quantum of projects you're working on. How do you glue this all together? How's your role supporting the owners, the developers, to really bring these projects to life and make them easy?
So the advantage of working across sectors, we work in the private and in the public sector, and having a range of amazing clients, is that there are certain themes that come up that we can zero in on and then repeat. And they've come up this morning in terms of some of the points raised by Paul and Davina. It's make the decision early is the first key step, and ensure in that case that it gets incorporated into the business cases, into the development agreements, and into the tenant briefs. With that locked in, then the next step's easy. Just go for it 100%. Don't waver, don't question, don't do it half-assed. Lock yourself in and go. And then with that, involve everyone. The third step, that's really key. From with Manson's, it's the founders are there on board, they get it. With the Northland District Health Board example, you've got Meng Chong there, their chief financial officer pushing it. But also that same DHB was the first DHB in New Zealand to get a Green Star rated office. And has the lowest operating costs per square metre of any of their portfolio. So they've really seen the benefit. And so it's actually really simple. Make the decision early, go for it 100% and involve everyone. And then following on from that, you need to bust a few myths. There are a few quantity surveyors out there, not RDT Pacific, but others, who would suggest you put a blanket percentage against a project to work out the cost of Green Star. So I'd be interested, Paul, in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's quite a common, we think, quite a common misconception. There's a thought there that to get a Green Star rating or to build your building in order to get a Green Star rating comes at a cost premium. From our perspective, we don't isolate the Green Star element of a development. We find that it gets absorbed in the overall cost of the building. It's becoming, and as I sort of touched on, it's becoming an expectation from both tenants and purchasers. If you try to quantify that, I think you're going to end up shying away from it, and you'll end up losing out. And this will contradict what was said slightly earlier, but that goes hand in hand with that is we don't actually believe that we can charge or justify charging higher rents for our buildings just because they're Green Star rated. I think it comes back to our business has a social conscience or corporate responsibility that's important to us. So we charge what we believe market rent. Whether the building was Green Star rated or not wouldn't alter that. But I
have less vacancy though. You know, those
Yeah.
buildings are often demonstrated to be less at risk. They lease earlier. You know, we had an example where we had a very sustainable building built and a non-sustainable building built next door. We were 100% leased. They were 70% empty for quite a while. You know, so there wasn't a theoretical market differential on rent. There just was no rent. You know, so I think it's, you know, I totally agree with you, but I think there's other metrics that we measure through.
absolutely, absolutely.
Maybe you can put that in your poem. There was no rent. Jenny, sorry, Davina, can we stay with you on some, obviously you talked a lot about the data and the commercial buildings, but I also believe Stocklands are the number one or have the highest number of community rated green products. So we've talked a bit about the DHBs, the hospitals, the schools, the commercial. What's this community tool? What's different about it from perhaps Homestar or Home Fit that we're starting to understand and implement here?
So the communities tool looks at when you're creating new places, particularly large communities, how you actually measure the broader things that create value for that community. So it's looking at things across the governance, the livability, how the frameworks for success are really enabled. So we've been very fortunate to deliver a large number of those within Australia. But the key opportunity for us, it's been a really different way for us to work with councils and local government as we actually plan those elements together. And it's been really fundamental for us having different relationships with those stakeholders and engaging them in the process. And we found that really fundamental, particularly as we lead large, complex communities. So our largest community, which is a 6-star Green Star community, actually is ultimately going to have 50,000 dwellings delivered over the next 30 years. And so for us, that has complex biodiversity elements. It actually is going to have more bike paths per capita, than some of the Nordic locations. And so for us, actually setting up the governance and framework, doing green schools, doing STEM schools, all those things require a different level of early engagement. We use communities as a framework as we're going through those really large projects and having a different language to talk about how we collaborate.
Yeah, really impressive. And Paul, if I can go to you from a Manson's perspective, obviously you're not just a commercial developer either. Have you started to see that in the residential developments coming through with, whether it's with the commercial tool or the trust?
Yeah, the majority of our residential developments at the moment fall under the umbrella of Ted's foundation. So again, that's something that's pretty close to his heart. So, you know, as anyone in here will know, the building code sets reasonably low requirements. So Ted's sought for his residential projects, which are sort of primarily focused on community housing, providing housing for those that need assistance. So he's looking to get a Homestar rating for those. And by default, that just creates, you know, and sort of stating the obvious here, but it creates drier, healthier homes, which for him and the company that's going to retain ownership of that for quite a while, that's pretty important.
Yeah, fantastic. Do you mind if we bring up the Slido questions now? If we can move to some of the audience questions before 5 or 10 minutes before we head to lunch. Here we are. So I'm not going to go in order because I'm going to pick on Jenny a bit here from Eka. She's been quiet for a little while and she doesn't have a PowerPoint this time. Jenny, we talk a lot about the data. I've seen a couple of questions popping up about business cases. I think it's their second on the list at the moment. What is Eka doing to support the industry in terms of the business case around this and driving that from your level?
To be honest, our focus has been on the largest energy users and the largest carbon emitters, but one of the key programs we offer is basically financial support for monitoring and targeting. That's based on the premise that you cannot manage what you do not measure, and many businesses in New Zealand don't know or don't care to know, I would say at this point, what their actual building performance is or their emissions. So I guess I would encourage, just echoing what Andrew said, anyone who's a tenant in the room, demand a neighbours rating from your landlord. And if you're a business with complex operations, do talk to Enviromark about carbon reporting and accounting. But measurement is the first step along this journey for any business of whatever, any size.
Yeah, agree. There's a question here for you, Simon. How can we get more developers and landlords on board with this? What you mentioned before, you sort of had these engage early, these 3 steps. What are some of the other things from your experience that we can get more people in? And to be fair, it's probably not those in the room here today. It's probably us influencing outside. But who are those that how can we get more people engaged?
Well, I think there's some pretty clear evidence that everything's moving very quickly. I think your point, Paul, around what was innovative 2 years ago is now the norm. For companies to remain relevant, one of the key drivers at the moment is talent retention. And often the talent, no disrespect to octogenarians, etc., is the youth that is coming through. And they have been aware of climate change and the impact to the world that we are leaving them for a long time. So they're looking for businesses, places that capture things that we can do at this point in time. So if you are a potential business that's looking to relocate, etc., if you engage with your staff, you're quite likely to find that it's a key decision, or it's of significance to a key part of your business, and so you'd be smart to future-proof yourself by picking a building, putting it into your brief, locking it in with your development agreement, and taking it from there. You're effectively pushing yourself into a redundant space if you're not thinking about it early.
Yeah, I'll just give a good plug for the Bailey's team there. We encourage a lot of our tenants when they're bringing the briefs to the market to demand it. I think it's the only way we're really going to make the change is if we don't hold the landlords and developers to account with the current low occupancy or low vacancy rates we have, they'll just continue doing the norm. So unless we create that pressure, it won't go away. There's a couple of questions coming your way, Paul, and I'll wrap them up into one. One is about Manson's reporting and getting to that carbon emission side of things. The other that popped up and then disappeared was where to next? Are you going to be the first to build a net carbon zero building in New Zealand?
Yeah, that would be great. That's about as non-committal as I can be. Yeah, I mean, look, I think over time, without a doubt, that's the way things are tracking. And we've always valued ourselves as a market leader, so I think it would be silly to not sort of start looking at that and put things in place. You know, it's not going to happen in the next 12 months, but I think there's definitely a path there that we need to start moving towards.
Fantastic. Last one, guys. I'm conscious of timing here. I just want to touch on Davina's new role with the GBCA. Can you let us know, Davina, how you plan to collaborate with the NZGBC, with ECA, with all the phenomenal groups, the Sustainability Business Network, all of the New Zealand efforts that are going on? What are you going to do as CEO of the Green Building Council Australia that's going to take us on a journey together?
Well, the thing that we're really fortunate is that the Australian Green Building Council and the New Zealand Green Building Council already have an amazing relationship and have for a long time. And I have a lot to thank my predecessor, Romilly Madu, for really being, you know, a guiding light in setting up that relationship. I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to learn from each other and actually do things better. You know, I think often we talk about, you know, some of Australia's success, particularly in commercial buildings, but I do think we have to acknowledge the Australian Green Building Council is just about to go on a pathway to update our View in Homes for a homes tool, right at the point that you're having some really exciting launches here and you're 11,000 homes down. So I think we really have to look at this as a two-way partnership. I couldn't be any more excited to be involved as we go in the next stage of this transition.
Fantastic. Can you join with me in thanking our panel this afternoon?